Well, thanks very much, Mike. You're literally just off the plane from China. Thanks for speaking with Blue Notes. Where were you in China?
Well, I spent a couple of days in Hong Kong, 2 days in Beijing, and the last couple of days at the Mayor's International Advisors Conference in Chongqing.
The view back in Australia at least, and I know elsewhere in the world, is that there's rising anxiety about what's happening in China. There's been some data that perhaps is worse than people expected. But what was the view from the ground there in China, from where you were?
Well, I think in Hong Kong the perspective was a little bit, there is a degree of concern, and of course I think that is as much to do with some of the political problems within Hong Kong at the moment. So of course China gets a little bit of a bad rap there. But going up into Beijing and Chongqing itself, meeting with the customers, meeting with government officials, and really finding out what was happening. Actually, the economy is still going pretty well. I also saw the chairman of a couple of the larger banks as well.
And it seems that increasingly now people take pieces of data from somewhere in China and extrapolate it for the whole economy.
Yeah, and I think that's very dangerous, you know, and people seem to do that particularly around the property sector. I saw a couple of property developers actually who are doing pretty well, and there's no doubt things have slowed down, but it's the same as property developers here. If you've got good property in the right place, you'll be doing okay. And of course the right gearing, you know, that's always helpful. There's no doubt there's still overcapacity, but when looking at the supply of property versus the demand, you know, there is still a huge amount to be done. By 2020, China is looking at urbanizing another 70 million people, and that's going to increase by another 100 million over the next 50 years.
One of the overriding concerns, I suppose, is that growth target that's been set. Now there's a lot of anticipation that the growth target won't be met, and then people cascade from that. What does it mean for resource demand?
Yeah, no, I think that's probably right. But I did actually mention to a couple of the government officials that they should start actually talking about growth in renminbi rather than in percentage. I mean, you don't talk about if the US economy grew at 7%, you'd think there's something wrong. But the Chinese economy is quite close to being as big as the US economy. And therefore, I think what is important is the scale of that growth in actual terms rather than percentage terms. You know, people tend to forget just how big the economy is now. And growing at 7%, you know, as I said before, it's like adding the whole economy of Switzerland in 1 year.
How did you and perhaps the people you were speaking with in China interpret what the central bank did last week on the liquidity front?
Well, I think, you know, there are various measures in terms of policy adjustment. Quite clearly, that is a little bit of a stimulus, but it's not going to be huge. And I think they're taking it one step at a time. They just want to tweak it a little bit. You know, basically the economy still depends very much on direct intervention, which is one of the problems. This is why interest rate deregulation and a move to full convertibility of the renminbi is so important, because until they get market forces to do some of the heavy lifting for them, you have to be interventionist.
And was there anything perhaps surprised you on this trip that you hadn't anticipated hearing?
Well, I'm always just amazed at how much progress has been made. And you know, I go to Chongqing, for example, probably at least once a year, and every time I go, the place has sort of changed again. You know, the way that they have developed they have two basic routes from Chongqing into the rest of China and the world. One is down the Yangtze River, you know, effectively to Shanghai, and the other is now they built a railway through to Duisburg in Germany. Now that idea came about 5 years in one of these mayor's advisory councils, and they've just got on and done it. And now it's taking something like 70% of all laptops and PCs made in the world go through that link.
Thanks for speaking with Blue Notes.
No, it's a pleasure.